Why do I have 7 hours on here?
Because that's just something, don't worry about it at all. Okay, we're in Denver, Colorado, interviewing Bill Funke from the 17th Infantry Battalion.
Mm-hmm.
And my name is Victoria Ekegren, and this is for Evelyn Christian University, the History Department. Well, first of all, talk about, what do you remember, what's the best characteristic you could tell me about your dad?
About my dad?
About your dad.
He was a fine mechanic. It was during Depression years, and the thing I remember now most about him was how he used his money. He was probably rather wealthy for Depression times, but he gave all his money away. So that very generous nature to his friends who were out of work, that's the thing that I think probably I remember most about him.
What kind of mechanic was he?
He was in a steel foundry. Very good mechanic. Felt he could run the world with a pair of pliers and a ball of wire, and he just worked so well. He had a lot of work during Depression when others didn't.
Yeah.
So I think that was that generous nature that I didn't really know. I didn't see at that time, but later on I knew about him.
So is this generous, has that affected you? Have you adopted part of that, or how did that
Well, I would
affect
like
you?
to think so. I believe so. Yeah. I certainly was not in a profession that caused great wealth, being a music teacher, so it had to be something else that brought it.
So, tell me, where were you born?
Atchison, Kansas,
What year?
1925.
1925. So this is right before the Depression. So what do you remember? Like, I know you were really young when, like, the Big Depression and everything.
Well, no, not really. See, I would have been 5, 6, 7,
Yeah.
8, like that. What do I remember about the Depression?
What kind of memories do you have?
I think I remember the people who always came to the door for food. And then I remembered that they would, if they found a house that had a sandwich for something, and my mother always did have something, they would make a mark on the curb in front of the house. And then that was a signal for other people who were coming through, or other out-of-work people, that signal out there meant that stop here because they will give you food. Then I think the other thing that reminds me about the Depression was the first WPA, NRA government programs.
And what are those?
That was Works Progress Administration and New Recovery Act when President Roosevelt started. Mm-hmm. And the vast number of people that were working on these projects. And I mean vast. I mean, one little project might have 15 or 20 men there. And they were getting paid, and it gave them food, so that was all right. I think those things I remember.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters.
Older or younger?
One younger, the rest older.
The rest older.
Mm-hmm.
How did that affect you being in the middle?
I don't remember it being a problem in the middle. It's something I recognized in later life, that the largest of us was the youngest, simply because when one moved out of the house there was more to eat.
Mm-hmm.
No, I never felt starved, I don't mean that, because what I had never had I didn't miss. And that was part of the Depression thing too. And of course the other thing in the Depression was the people who seemed drawn close by adversity to each other. Even large towns were small communities then. And, but that was my childhood. Mm-hmm.
Did your parents talk a lot about, like, World War I, II?
Never. Never. About World War I?
Yeah.
No, they didn't. Being German, my father was very removed. He and his brothers would never speak German in our house. And I'm very sorry for that now, because I would like to have learned the language. But when they were together, they would speak German, but when they were with us, they would not, because he just wanted to be removed from that. And so they never talked about World War I.
When you were a child, could you even imagine, like, another World War coming up so close, with the...
Well, having not remembered World War I, because it ended in 1918, it didn't affect me that way. But I remember adults becoming very, very nervous before it ever happened. I could sense that in a lot of people. and the way they were glued to the radio for news. And even as a young age, I was aware that something was afoot, and they were worried. I was not worried, particularly.
How did your parents react when, in 1939, when Germany started invading countries?
Very tense. Very tense. I think most people of that age knew that it wasn't going to be long, even though there was a lot of rhetoric about it's not our war and this kind of thing. I think most people who had been through World War I knew that it was soon going to be. And that 1939. Yes, I can remember I can remember the news broadcast. I was sitting in our dining room with my father when the first newscast came of the German going into Poland.
And how did that make you feel? Like, what were you thinking?
At that time, I didn't think it had affected me that much.
And you were about 12,
Yeah.
12, 13?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of just like hearing, like we hear news, like watching the action movie kind of now, just hearing
That's
it.
right.
It
Pretty
just-
much the same, yeah. Nothing much changed in our activities. When they began to talk about rationing and things like that, that began to affect us. We didn't understand that. And lowering the speed limit to the 35 miles an hour. That's what the national speed limit was during the war, was 35 miles an hour, which we can't even fathom now, driving miles at 35. But I don't think, personally, it tended to affect people my age in 39. Now, 40, and it began to come out, we became older, and later on in high school, then it became a thing we didn't talk about a lot, but I'm sure we all felt it.
So, how did when did you think about, like, joining the war? Like, tell me about, like, Pearl Harbor, for example. Like, what do you remember?
Oh, I remember very well. As a matter of fact, I was in Emporia, Kansas. I was playing in an all-state band in Emporia, Kansas, when the news came of Pearl Harbor. Then we were frightened. As a matter of fact, we didn't even think we were going to get home to Atchison from Emporia, because it was very frightening then. Then the thing I recall after that was the next day they had a general assembly in school to urge all the boys to stay right in school, because everybody was going to run right off to enlist. And it took a lot of urging by a lot of people not to do that.
So how did you feel inside? Were you angry?
I think I was, yeah. I couldn't understand how anybody could do that kind of thing when it was unexpected. I think what made us angry, as a general populace, I think the anger was not, well, it was directed at the attack, certainly, but I think the anger was directed at what was going on in Washington then, when people from Japan were supposedly speaking peace,
Yeah.
and then that was building up all the time. That deception, I think, that's the deception, I think, was the real angering point.
How did this affect your parents, like in your home life, and were they worried about you? And
Yes, because I had an older brother who went into service almost immediately then, and they were very worried. A strange way, you talk about my father again, he started buying war bonds, and he bought bonds that we never knew he had until my mother died. But he was to the point that he felt that anybody who didn't spend every last penny that they could on war bonds was a traitor. I mean, literally a traitor, because he was so taken by that movement. And you ask how he was affected. He was affected that way. He just felt that everyone should be doing this. So it did change our lives.
so your brother enrolled, did he enroll already in 41 or 40?
You know, I can't tell you that date. I don't recall exactly. What
How
year that
long
was.
after your brother joined did you join?
I think about when I got out of high school in 43.
43.
Mm-hmm. And that was the years that the Army buses were practically backed up to the graduation door, because you were all ready to go.
Yeah. So you never college?
No, right from high school, right into service.
What was your dad prepared? Like, how did he react?
I don't even remember any reaction. I'm sure he had some, but he was very kind of a private person and didn't show emotion a lot. So I'm sure it did affect him, but he never showed it really.
So what were your feelings just before you graduated from high school and stuff? You know,
I
what
was
were you
ready.
thinking?
I was ready. I was afraid I was not going to be accepted into the Army. 'Cause I'd been sick most of my life with bronchial asthma, and I was very small. You can't believe it looking at me now, but I was very small, and I didn't think they would even accept me, and I was very worried that I would not be accepted. And that was a general feeling then. It was not how can I get out of it, but how can I get in, which is a little change from what we see now.
How do you think your brother, being in the service, like just being, you know, when did he go to war? Like when did he go on his first, to go fighting actually? When
He was stateside. He was a transportation officer on ships between the United States and Hawaii, so he never saw actual combat.
Did he write letters? Like what did he tell you about war and letters?
Well, since he hadn't really been in it, he didn't tell me much, but I know I always thought he regretted that too. To this day, I think he regretted it, particularly when he knew where I was going. And, he used to write letters from a desk soldier to a fighting soldier, and that's how he would address them. You know. So I always thought he felt that he wanted to be more of a part, but what he did was important also.
So when you got drafted right after high school, where did you go?
I went to Camp Roberts, California, and I was trained in artillery. And at that time, basic training, I think, was 16 or 17 weeks long. So it was a long basic training. And we were there for about 4 months.
How did it feel being away from home the first time?
Well, it wasn't the first time. And I think it was... I never had any homesickness. And I think one of the reasons, as I said before earlier, I'd been so sick with bronchial asthma. As soon as I left home, it left, and it was the first time in my life, health-wise, I felt good. And I kind of enjoyed all that stuff out there, and running in the dry river that a lot of people hated. I thought it was okay.
Who do you remember as your first friend? Somebody that was in training with you.
Someone who was in training with me?
Yeah. What do you remember about the guys that... how's the mood between the guys? Were everybody excited, or...?
I think so. We were such a diverse group. We were every place from Harvard graduates down to almost uneducable people, to people that we had to make their beds for them because they couldn't learn to make a bed, and we wanted to keep them out of trouble. So it was a wide diversity of intelligence and background. I thought that they were pretty private, most of the men. Very few people had a large circle of friends, one or two in basic that they stayed with, but it wasn't a real camaraderie type of thing.
So was there tension between the groups?
No, I don't think so. You mean between those groups?
Yeah, between like the Harvard grads?
No, I don't think so. I never felt it, really.
So who were your closest friends?
By name?
By name, do you remember names?
Yes, I remember him, the impossible name, Joe Goggin from Kansas. He was just kind of about at my same level and same personality, and we kind of chummed together. There was not any chumming went on at that time because you never got out of camp. You were just there. I mean, that was your home. You didn't do anything. And then I suppose since we were trained in artillery, the group that worked on one particular howitzer with us, we got to know pretty well. But Joe, I remember particularly.
How did you two become friends?
We were on the same gun crew, for one thing, and we seemed to react well together. And I was always impressed by him. He wrote letter after letter after letter, every night. I was not a letter writer, he was, and I always thought that was kind of neat that he would do that, and I was kind of attracted to a person who felt that strongly about letter writing to somebody. But
so who did you write letters to? Is it girlfriends?
I don't think so. I think it was just parents, and he said he wrote to teachers and things like that back home in Kansas. That was a long way from home, really was, from California to Kansas, but I have no idea where he is now. I've tried to find him, but I haven't been able to.
So tell me what happened next after basic training.
After basic was when ASTP program was still going, and it
I
was
noticed.
Army Specialized Training Program,
Okay.
which had a lot of jokes made about it.
Okay.
They were going to make engineers and doctors out of everybody, which I thought was a little strange, but they did. And I went to, where first? To Santa Rosa, California, to junior college, and then I was sent to New Mexico ANMA in Las Cruces until the program ended shortly after that. They found out they needed bodies more than they needed engineers, so they closed the program. I thought it was a program destined to failure from the start because they never knew exactly where they were going. I think it was patterned after the Navy V-12 program, which was very successful. And the Army kind of thought we better do something, and they weren't quite sure what to do. It's always felt that. But that was the next two things after basic.
So did you go to Camp Campbell at all in Kentucky? Did you have a chance to?
No. I like most ASDPers. They joined at Berkeley.
So what was your first experience about? Like what? How did they transfer you? They just said, "Well, we don't have enough money. We're gonna go," or what
No, they
happened
didn't
there?
even say. They just said the program was closed. Pack
So-
your bags. The train will be here.
So how was the train ride?
I
You
don't
went
remember.
from New Mexico.
New Mexico to Camp Berkeley, Texas, which wasn't too far. That was all right. I think it was an overnight trip. And by then you had become used to just, if they said go, you went, and you didn't worry too much about where you were going. But none of us knew anything about the 12th, or they didn't tell us where we were going. Just get on the train.
How many people did you have on the train with you traveling?
I can't recall that. I think there must have been about 3 carloads from New Mexico A&M that ended up in Berkeley.
Did your friend go with you?
No, I had left him. I don't know where they sent him. I had left him after Santa Rosa, California. Yeah. Well, I had some other friends by then, rather close friends of.
And who were these people?
Well, one man named Joe Merza from northern Minnesota. The spitting image of Tony Danza. If you look at Tony Danza now, you look at Joe Merza, even to the tone of the voice and actions. And we were pretty close friends in New Mexico, and he ended up in the 12th. In the 17th also, not the same company. But so we weren't quite alone when we got there.
Yeah. So what do you remember first from Abilene? Like about the town and the people.
We were kind of cold-shouldered because here was a bunch of men who had been together since Campbell, kind of the old soldier type, and here came a bunch of college boys in. And I think they were skeptical of what we could do. As a matter of fact, my company commander told me just 2 years ago that he was more frightened of us than we were of him.
And who was your company commander?
Carl Helton. Carl Helton has been interviewed before, I think, someplace. But no, we had lunch together a couple years ago, and he said, "You guys didn't realize how I felt. I didn't know what to do, what to expect. If you could be taught." Or if you thought you were going to be a little snooty because you had just come out of the ASD program. Probably socially that was the first reaction I had to Berkeley. And I think most of the men felt that too. But it wasn't long before that disappeared.
So did you sleep in the same barracks as the other men, or did you guys
Oh,
sleep
yeah.
in a group,
Oh,
or
no.
did they separate you
Well,
guys?
in Berkeley they weren't barracks, they were just little squad huts.
Okay.
After you were assigned to a platoon and a squad, no matter who was in it, they stayed in that together.
Yeah. How many people did you have in the squad?
I think 8 or 10 in the squad.
So you got to know these people.
Strangely enough, you didn't. You worked together, but those people already had friendships built up from past in Campbell, and you weren't quite in their group. You kind of stuck to the people you would know. And now some squads were made up of people that came out of ASDP, and they already knew each other. They were very close.
Yeah.
But no, not really. You didn't pal around with everybody.
So tell me, what would be a regular day, like a normal day in training then?
Very early in the morning. Field problems.
Like,
You'd either go to the rifle range or you'd go to the infiltration course under the barbed wire where they were shooting the machine guns over you to keep your head down, or or they would take you out and give you a map and a compass and drop you off someplace you'd never been, and you had to find your way back. Or platoon problems, actually attack problems. Just, it was very thorough. It really was very thorough training. And then the evening you were pretty much free to do what you want, to go to Abilene, which was kind of a thrill.
So what was there to do in Abilene? Do you remember a specific event or a couple you want to share?
I don't remember a lot about Abilene, except one place that used to have the best ice cold watermelon and lemonade, and after a hot day out on the Texas prairie, that was good. But as far as the city, I don't recall a lot about it. I used to go to a lot of churches in Abilene, just go in on Sunday and just visit.
Well, where was your favorite church? Do you remember?
I don't believe I had one. I think I was just kind of searching at that time. I'd been raised a Lutheran, so I just went to everything I could find. And I had a girlfriend back home then, so I wasn't particularly interested in.
What was her name?
Her name was Mary Catherine.
Mary Catherine.
Mm-hmm.
So did you keep writing to her then? Or?
I did until I went overseas, and then she found somebody else and married him.
Oh,
Had a large family. I saw her not too long ago, a couple of years ago. But, no, I wasn't attached to anybody particularly like so many of the men were. I think training and overseas was much more difficult for people who were really committed to some kind of relationship, either marriage or fiance or something. I think it was difficult for them. For those of us who were just living free, I don't think it was any of that kind of a problem. But it was kind of an interesting time.
So did you go on dates at all in Abilene?
No, I didn't. Never did. No, Joe, Marissa, and I usually kind of palled around. Of course, he had a girlfriend back in Minnesota, so he wasn't particularly interested. So.
What do you remember about the people in Abilene?
I thought they were very friendly. I had no quarrel with them when we'd go to church or if we'd go to a restaurant or something. I just thought they were very, very fine. I suppose other people had different opinions of them, but maybe their reactions were different than ours. So I had no quarrel with them at all.
Who's your favorite commander or sergeant?
Well, my favorite commander was Carl Helton, probably my company commander, who was, if he sees these, he'll get after him. But he was a swashbuckler. He was from Kentucky, Harlan County, Kentucky, where they still had feuds instead of elections, and he was very tough. And he was so good looking, he was almost pretty. He really was, and he's still a good looking man, although he wears his hair like I do now. But he was very spit and polished. And like I say, a lot of people hated him because he was so persnickety and so finicky. But I didn't know why he was that until this couple of years ago. He said he's just worried that he wasn't doing the right things. But he's very, very tough. We were always amazed that he could throw a knife better than most people could shoot a pistol. In a contest, he'd win by throwing knives. He was cleanliness was his thing. The company area and the barracks or the squad huts had to be perfect, which is all right. And I just thought he was a fine officer. And then overseas, I just thought the same thing. And,
how about your commanding officers? Were you in contact at all with Brewer?
No, not that high.
Mm-hmm.
Not that high.
What do you remember about him? Did you ever?
Well, actually, see, we were in. I think the men who were in longer probably knew about him more than I did, because we were only with the 12th before we went overseas from February or March till September, so we didn't know much about him. And then had been a change of command by then when General Allen came in.
So what were the rumors about him, about his release just before you guys went overseas?
I don't recall those. I don't anything specific about it. I think some of us thought it was just kind of a general thing, that he would take command of another group. But I know since then there's been all sorts of things that the unit hadn't been trained properly, or he hadn't overseen the training as much as he should. At least it's that I know about now. But to me, it was just another high echelon officer that was changed. and we didn't feel the effect. I don't think. I don't think it trickled down particularly, because time he left, the training was about done. There's nothing to change.
So what was your particular, like, your specific thing to do every day that you were trained to do?
As a rifleman.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get good? Had you been shooting a rifle back home and stuff? Did you have?
No. Strangely enough, I wasn't. Yeah, and basic training, I was trained in artillery, and I really wanted to go back to artillery. But when I saw on my paper, 23rd Tank Battalion, then I came unglued because I'm very claustrophobic. So I said, well, you can put me there if you want, but I won't be there long. So where did they put me? Not the artillery where I wanted to go, but the infantry. So no, I'd not been particularly gun-oriented before then, except in basic training. Of course, we did a lot of it there. But that was just the regular training of the artillery, the advances and the attacks and this type of thing, and taking care of yourself, and a lot of target shooting.
What were letters? What would you typically write to if you wrote home? There are occasions, a few occasions that you maybe did write home to your parents before you went from Abilene.
Oh, after when I got to Abilene, I wrote a lot.
What'd you tell them?
Pretty much what we were doing, what we had trained on that day. Because there were really no specifics that you couldn't write then. That we had been on a field problem, or we'd been out for a week and bivouacked a week. Just pretty much what we were doing, just little incidental things.
Do you remember what your dad used to write to you, like what they would say in their letters, what they would talk about?
They knew a lot about the other people I knew who were in service, and they would write where they were and what they were doing. Not a lot what was going on at home, which that was pretty mundane and ho-hum at the time, because you didn't do much at home. But I was interested in where my other friends, high school friends, were in service, and they tended to keep track of where these people were. And that was it, I think.
Do you remember any practical jokes or anything that you guys pulled on each other? Or?
In service?
In service.
Oh, boy. Yes, and I tell my grandkids about it when they think I'm awful. Let's see. Well, in barracks it used to be there was a little thing that they would tie your shoestrings with the cord while you're sleeping, and run out about 30 feet of cord, and then they'd stamp their feet and holler chow, and you'd jump up and you'd run and you'd run out of string about 30 feet and pop right down the face, flat in their face. That was always a fun one. When anybody new came in, but you learned that in a hurry to get over that. And let's see what else. Oh, another one was you'd get 4 men when somebody was sleeping, and you'd lift their cot up. 4 people could lift it up pretty easy, and you'd stack barrack bags, not barrack bags, foot lockers, until they were about in the little rafters above. And then you'd do the same thing, make some commotion and call fall out or something. They'd roll out of bed and they'd be 9 feet above the floor. Oh, they were funny now, but they were painful at the time.
So were you usually the one causing, like, doing the pranks, or?
Well, you were always the butt of the joke first, and then you got into the group that was causing them.
Do you think this helped build up a team spirit within?
I think it released tension. That's what it did. Yeah.
Tension. That would be my next question. Like, how did the war, the progressing of the war, affect you? Were you thinking about leaving and anxious to go to Europe and fight? Or?
I think most of the men were tired of training and thought anything, even war, might be better than what they were doing. It was just became monotonous and repeat and repeat and repeat, which was fine, You were building what skills you needed to do. You could do that, but I think they were getting tired of this skill building and wanted to put them into action. Plus the fact that we had so many of our friends that had gone, and we thought it was time, that there was a sense of duty there. And I imagine some men would have been very upset had they not been able to go overseas. When the time approached, you became very apprehensive because you didn't know which way you were going to go. And I think for most of us, if you had a hope, you hoped that you were going to Europe instead of the islands and the Pacific.
Why would you say that?
I think probably because of the type of thing we had done. We had not been trained for any type of jungle or island hopping fighting at all. It had been wide open spaces, and so we were hoping that they wouldn't misuse us again and send us to the wrong place, and they didn't. Okay.
What do you remember about leaving Abilene? Like, what went through your head moving?
Well, the events leading up to it, I think the thing I remember most is getting the equipment ready, dumping all the weapons in cosmoline. To this day, I'm not sure what cosmoline is. It's kind of a paraffin type of stuff. And then wrapping them in oil paper and sitting there in the company street for days and days wrapping those and getting all that equipment. And then you never saw your weapons or anything after that, after you left. And then I remember leaving the train station, and I don't remember where that was, actually. It was in the camp. I think the train pulled right into the camp. I remember leaving at midnight, which I thought was all very sinister to leave at midnight instead of the daytime. No particular regrets leaving, just kind of excited with what was coming. But that trip was a miserable trip because you were packed into the cars with no air conditioning, and how many days it took us to get to Camp Shanks, I don't recall. Must have been about 3. I think we were ready to leave.
What would you guys talk about on the train up there?
As you travel, I think you talked an awful lot about food, strangely enough. Food that you remembered. I think you talked about family. I don't remember men talking about what they were going to do after the war. I don't recall that at all, that they really had any plans beyond the next day. I think that was pretty typical. You didn't really make plans beyond the day or two. It was lots of card playing, lots of gambling, and petty gambling, really, because you didn't have anything to gamble with big. But it was new for me because I had never been east of the Missouri River. Most of our 12th Armored men came from the east. A lot of them from New York, Pennsylvania, and the Carolinas in that area. So they knew that country. To me, it was kind of different. I was just kind of interested in it as it went by. But it was pretty routine. Nothing exciting except miserable heat and dirt.
So
I think the dirt, I remember.
So how long were you guys in New York before you actually shipped out?
I have a date. I don't think we were there more than a week and a half or 2 weeks. I remember we all got one night's leave to go into New York. And it was at the edge of a hurricane. It was miserable. I remember that.
So do you remember what you did at all?
Just walked. We didn't go any place. There was no place to go, really. So I was ready to go back to Camp Shanks. It didn't interest me particularly at the time. I was still a small town boy, and I was kind of overawed by that stuff. Maybe I was frightened. I don't know. I could have been frightened by a city like that.
And you were about how old at this time?
I was only 18.
18.
Wait a minute. No, 19.
19.
Mm-hmm.
So were you among the younger then in the group? Or?
Yes, there were a lot of us about that same age, though, 18, 19, and 20. Yeah, we were young. We were really young. And when I look at people 18, 19, and 20 now, I think, oh boy, were we young. We didn't think so, but we were.
So how did you get transported? In what ship? Or did you fly?
Oh, the Empress of Australia.
Can you describe that ship?
I thought it was huge, and it was packed, very uncomfortable. The English food was miserable. That's where I learned to hate marmalade. And herring. I've never looked a herring in the eye since. It was at one time a luxury ship. It was an Australian ship that was originally a German ship that was built for the victory celebration in World War I for the Kaiser. That was his boat. And then things didn't work out for Germany in World War I the way he thought it was going to. Somehow it ended up in Australia as a luxury liner, and then ended up as a troop ship. Very ornate. I mean, lots of wide stairways and mahogany things. It must have been a beautiful thing when it was new. But it was very, very packed.
So were you guys getting more anxious as you came closer to Europe, or?
We were anxious to get off the water. That was probably the most frightening time, I think. Supposedly we were in one of the largest convoys that ever went across, and the constant zigzagging, and then the destroyers going off, you know, that they'd spotted something. That was rather frightening. I think most of us were uneasy all the time. We tried to pretend not to be, but I'm sure we all were deep down, because we knew there were a lot of submarines out there, and that was an awful big target. And I've often wondered why they ever packed so many in one division on one ship. Because had it gone down, it would just, the division would have been gone. But it worked.
What do you remember about all the hush-hush about, like, you being a secret division moving across the ocean?
I didn't know that it was then. I thought the mystery division thing came about later. There may have been about hush-hush moving across. Well, of course, everything was hush-hush. Nobody knew anything, who was going or when. But I don't think we knew as a division we were anything special. Like I say, the mystery division came later, when it was moved back and forth from army to army.
Okay, so where'd you land?
Liverpool.
Liverpool?
Mm-hmm. And I thought that was great. I thought I was really ready to get off that boat. We were glad. As a matter of fact, when you came inside of England, you were pretty glad because you didn't think anything was going to happen to you anymore. But we were not in Liverpool at all. We just put us in trucks and drove us off.
And where'd you go next?
To Tidworth.
Tidworth?
Tidworth. We weren't in barracks. We were in squad tents then, but there were some barracks someplace near Tidworth, I'm told. And there we did a few more weeks of training.
Like what did they train you specifically?
A lot of attack problems. I mean, given an attack and you start in and moving as squads, using hand signals to move forward and to deploy and that type of thing. But
do you remember here, since you guys have a new commanding general, could you tell a difference at all?
No, I couldn't at all. I still think the command of the companies was probably more vital than the command of the battalions, I suppose. But we hadn't changed battalions commanders. We had the same battalion commander. Mm-hmm.
So, where did you guys move from Tidworth? First of all, what's your first encounter with that Englishman? What do you remember about the British? Do you have any
I don't think I had any close encounters. We went to London a couple times, and the Blackouts were on that time, but I don't think we had any encounters with them particularly.
How was the mood in London at that time?
To me, I was really surprised. I thought it might be a lot more panic-stricken than they were. But they had been through so much, they had become adapted to it. The blackouts were novel to me. Of course, we had not seen anything like that. The subways, where people went down into the subways at night to sleep, and you'd ride the subways, and all these people would be sleeping along the tracks because they'd stay their nights down in the subways. I thought that was kind of strange. It wasn't strange. I thought it was kind of frightening that they'd have to do that. Didn't do a lot in London before we went over into France. Went to see Glenn Miller one time at the Stage Door Canteen, and we couldn't get within 3 blocks, but they had speakers all over so you could hear, and the air raid sirens went off, and nobody seemed to move. I don't know why, but they didn't. And
did it seem to you like people were tired of the war already back?
Weary. I don't know if tired is the word. Weary. It was, yeah, in the faces there was kind of not a hopeless feeling, but or a hopeless look, but just kind of weary.
Were they excited that you guys were there, or like how did they receive you?
Oh, I think they received us all right. I think in the cities it might have been different, because I know they weren't particularly fond of Americans. They thought they were overpaid, over many things, and they were worried about their their own English unit type of thing being destroyed. And frankly, they were worried about all these men over there and all those English girls running around. And maybe they had good cause for worry, I don't know. But I think that was, in many places that had trouble, that was the problem.
So did you have any encounters with young English women at this?
No, we never had time or whatever to do.
So did you encounter like the British soldiers that you met most, or?
No, we didn't. I didn't see any British soldiers while we were training. Oh, just the civilians in London when we were there. But when we were out in Tidworth training, we just didn't see them.
And how long were you guys in Tidworth?
Till October, I think, about a month, as I recall. You know, I cannot remember the date we went to France for some reason.
Do you remember, can you describe the day that you left?
Yeah, very well. We went to Southampton. And I remember walking from the train to the ship. And I remember, strangely enough, I remember a big iron fence. Now, why that stuck in my mind all this years, we walked beside a big iron fence. And I got to thinking there must be something very important beside that iron fence. But it was completely black, and I can remember stumbling and things like this, and then calling the name and going up into the troop ship, not the troop ship, the LST, to go across the channel.
What were you thinking? Like, what were your...
I was worried. I really think that was probably the first time I was worried going across that channel.
Did you know exactly where you guys were going
No,
next?
no, they didn't tell us. They just, you got there, and when they got there, they said we were at Le Havre. But then that was our first, well, other than London, that bombed out, that was our first really experience of seeing, and I think that was kind of awesome. I mean, in the true sense of awe, the destruction of that city. Couldn't understand.
What did it look like?
It looked like almost skeletal. I mean, walls of buildings mainly just standing. Well, it looked dead. It really looked dead, except for all the troop activity around it. But as a city, it looked bad. But we weren't there either. We just went right through it.
So where'd you go next?
To a place called Auffay, A-U-F-F-Y, or F-A-Y, I'm not sure. A-Y. Must be A-Y. And we were just billeted out in a muddy field there, in pup tents. And it rained, and it rained, and it rained.
Did the mood go down with the rain? How did that affect everybody?
Yeah. Then it became almost angry that we weren't someplace out of that rain. We were angry at most everything then, I think.
Were you guys still... How did you feel? Were you still wanting to go and fight and you were ready for it, or how did...
Yeah, I think so. I don't think anybody wanted to be where they were. They wanted to get on with it. As long as we were that far, let's go. And I think when we finally started moving east or southeast as it was, I think there was a sense of relief.
So, do you remember your first battle in Canada?
Yeah, I can. It was near Binding. We left Luneville. We were staged in an old French barracks at Luneville, France. And then they moved us up, and I can't remember who we were relieving, but we moved up at night. And I can remember the artillery barrage as we moved up. And like any good infantryman, the first thing I started to do was dig. Get a hole and get in it. And then we were moved up as outposts, which I always thought was kind of strange, because I thought if there's anybody out there, we're sure not going to stop them in this barn. And we were there for, I think, a day before the attack proceeded on the barracks, Binding Barracks. And then a strange thing happened on that barracks. We were held down by a machine gun nest and couldn't move. And they either brought in artillery or a mortar. It might have been even a tank. I don't recall that. But we got the machine gun nest, and we went on. And I think a day or so later, we were in these barracks. And the chaplain came in, and he said, is there someone named Funke in your company? And I think it was Joe Merza. Said, yeah, he's over there. And so he handed me a German canteen with the name Funke. that he had picked out of that machine gun nest that had stopped us. And he says, "Your cousin wants you to have this." And I carried that thing for a while, and then it got kind of cumbersome. I chucked it, but I thought that was kind of strange. Kind of a strange story.
How were you guys able to sleep well? Like, you know, did...
As I recall, I never had any trouble sleeping. We were usually so tired that you just, the exhaustion just set in, and even with noise and wondering what's around you, you were still able to sleep well.
How are the French pursuing you at this time? Just...
Well, some of the towns we were in, I thought very well. As we got closer to the Alsace region, I really had misgivings about them, because those people kind of blew with the wind, whoever was in control at the time, you know. But they were not unfriendly to us, and yet I thought they were very reserved.
Did you have any personal encounters with any? Do you remember anybody in particular?
In France?
In France.
Yeah, in Alsace. We were, when we came back off the line from Rohrbach, they sent us to, I can't remember the town right now, but yeah, we were billeted in houses. And there was a family there. And she really took pretty good care of us. Several of us were sick with really bad colds and flus, and she kind of mothered us, and we kind of liked her. And we were there at New Year's, and she baked a peach pie for us. Now, we never figured out whether she missed, because we kind of pilfered the stuff from our own mess wagons. So we found the peaches and the flour and the stuff for her. She's going to make some pie. We never could figure out if she mistook the sugar for salt or not, but on that peach pie was salt instead of sugar. Some of the guys thought she was getting at us. I kind of liked her. I didn't think she was. I thought she just made a mistake.
How old was she? Do you remember?
Oh, she was probably in her 60s.
Were you able to speak with her at all, or
just a little bit? They just knew a little bit of English, and we had some men that knew some German that would talk with them, and we didn't mind being there at all. They were pretty nice to us. We did have a strange thing about that house that I wondered years since. We happened to be in their kitchen when somebody came in and said, "Get your gear, we're moving up." And just after I walked out the door, I looked, and the man who had been there jumped on his bicycle and was riding as fast as he could toward the east. This is exactly where we were going. And I've always thought since then that we were being taken, that as soon as he said that, he went where he thought we were going to go. I believe that to this day, that somebody was told that we were moving. And now, like I say, I always kind of liked the family, but I'm not too sure I did anymore, because I thought right then that he's going someplace to tell.
So were you guys attacked closely after that then, or?
With them?
Yeah.
With that family?
Yeah, no, like,
oh,
no, were you attacked, like, as you moved on that road further up?
No, we weren't attacked because we were on the attack then.
Okay.
And that was when we moved up into Herlisheim.
Okay.
That was the next step.
That was the next step.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you remember? Like, what's the...
Well, I was assigned to Major Logan, the battalion commander, as a runner. Now, I don't know if you know what a runner is, but that's the dirtiest you can get. Now, I even asked my company commander 2 years ago, why was I assigned to be a runner? Were you trying to get rid of me? And he said, no, we only wanted the best. And I said, thanks, Carl. I don't buy that. But, with the company commander and the battalion commander. And a runner is just a go-between when you have no radio contact from the battalion commander to the companies, to the platoons and whatever. And you're kind of out there by yourself. You're just kind of left out, hang out dry.
So how did that make you feel when you were...
I was, the first day I was apprehensive about it. The second day when we got into, it became very, very tense. because you were given things to do, and some of them you could do, and some of them you couldn't because you were just trapped. I mean, you knew you were being watched, and anytime they wanted to stop you, they'd stop you from your mission. But the first day, the first attack on Herlesheim, that was pretty grim. We just rode down today with a man who was with the tank battalion that was with us that just was decimated. And I think I was upset. No, I just thought it was foolish because there was a crust on the ground, and as infantry, we were around the tanks, and because the tanks drew fire, therefore you drew fire. And the tanks would break through that crust, and they were helpless. They were just sitting ducks like in a gallery, and they just picking them off. And I never could understand why they ever moved that battalion in there.
So do you think that's one of the mistakes? What were other mistakes you could see?
Other mistakes were when we first went in toward, and they said, don't send any fire into the woods to the right of our attack. My question to Lieutenant Ogletree at that time was, why not? Somebody's in there firing at us. Because we thought somebody else was in there. And I was told that the 56th Battalion was in there, but this man today said they were told it was a French battalion in there. So it was pretty confused.
So what do you think caused all this confusion about, like, officers not knowing exactly?
I have no idea. I really don't. But I've had an experience since then, about 2 years ago. I was wearing my 12th Armored jacket, and a man in a restaurant came up to me, and he was in military intelligence, which is kind of an oxymoron sometimes. But he asked if I knew anything about Herlesheim, and I said yes. I said, I know a lot about it. And he said that he was in Stuttgart, Germany, and they had been fed the same information, supposedly. I mean, he says, we're assuming that your high echelon officers got this same information. And he said, in our problems, we could see exactly what was happening from that information. We never understood why they didn't seem to see that. And I said, well, it's a little different. You're sitting at a table figuring that problem out, and the line officer out there getting information. But that's truly one of the mysteries, how that much misinformation of who was there. That was the big thing.
So were you guys time pressured to move forward, or what do you think caused all?
Yeah, I think we were. I think they were under time constraint of some kind because they knew they had to get it done before anybody else came in to reinforce. But what they didn't know was that the reinforcements were already there.
So why was Herlesheim so important to take?
Because there were three troops. There was Gamsheim, Herlesheim. Sorry, don't know the third one. And it was the same time that they had promised Strasbourg to be recaptured for Hitler's birthday present or some darn thing like that. And those three little areas were key for that movement across the river to bring into it. And as bad as it was, I still think the history shows now that even though we were confused, in our confusion we managed to do what we were supposed to do and not let that attack take place. Because when we first heard that there were there's all sorts of numbers. People tell you different numbers. I heard some 340 infantry troops in there, and then we find out that there wasn't that. It was an SS division in there. That's a pretty big difference. But how the accurate information never got down, I don't know. I have no idea. It wasn't long before we knew after we got in.
So if you were frustrated, I'm sure people around you were frustrated. What were some things they were saying about it? How many days was the battle first of all? Like how many days?
Well, actually, the battle started before 17th got in.
Okay.
They had been in and out several times, and that's the confusing thing. After they'd been in and out so many times, why they didn't know there was more in there. That we started in on an afternoon, and then it was all over for the 17th by early the second morning, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, something like that. But once we got in, we knew it was wrong, because I was with the battalion commander. And that's always been a thing. I've often wondered why he was up that close. I thought he could have been more effective back further to know what was going on. But Major Logan, that was just the kind of man he was. He his men were doing something, he wanted to be there, and yet it might have not been good military strategy. It was certainly morale building for his men. But at 9 o'clock in the morning was the first time that he asked for permission to leave. I was standing right there when he made the radio, and they said, no, you can't leave. And he tried to explain what was happening, because then we could see, we knew.
So what was happening at that point?
Well, we knew that they had that other division in there, in that tanks, and we weren't going to get through that town. Because at that time, as a runner, he asked me to try to contact, and he gave me the name of a man, I don't remember this day what it was, to contact in the 43rd Tank Battalion, which they thought was in someplace else, but there was no radio contact. And this Ed Wasak and I tried to find those people. We couldn't find them. We couldn't get across the town, mainly. Then again, he asked for permission later in the afternoon, because our mission was to stay with him, to be his runner for messages. And then he asked again to be relieved and to pull out before we were done. And the still same thing was thing. Then when it became very apparent that we weren't going to go any place forward or backwards, his last permission was, I think, around 10 o'clock at night. He asked for permission again. And then now I thought it was kind of funny. The thing was, no, you can't come out but attack in the morning. Well, attack with what? You know, there wasn't anything left.
What did you have left at that time?
We were so scattered, we really didn't know that the ammunition was low. We'd lost men during the day, and we'd lost that tank support, and there were tanks in there, so we had no tank support. And but he was promised ammunition at midnight, and they gave the coordinates, and I've often wondered, maybe in our records it would say what group was supposed to come up and help in the morning. And his statement was there, and this is where our history book is wrong, and I've never written, and some of them have been after me saying, why don't you write what he actually said, because I can remember that like it was yesterday. And he said, send the ammunition, but let those guys sleep, we won't be here in the morning. And he was right. The ammunition truck did come up. Some of the guys tried to get out to get it, and some of them were caught in fire then. But it was just a strange thing why they would not let us pull out. And that's always been a source of wonderment to everybody who was there. 8 men, I guess, 12 men did get out some way. One was drowned trying to get out, crossing the Zorn River, but 8 of them did. And one of them happened to be my very best buddy.
And who's this?
His name was Alt Novist. But I didn't see him. I thought he was killed. And I didn't see him until 65.
Wow.
And it was by accident that I found him. That's another story, a strange story. But,
So what happened to you?
toward the night they were trying to pull the outpost back, and that was still our job to go out at night and get the outpost to bring them back near the battalion. And we spent hours just trying to find them. We knew where some of them were. Some of them we went into places we shouldn't have been. And I always felt that they were letting us through so that they could find where the outposts were. I always felt that. But we pulled most of them back. Our company commander was one of them. And then he asked me who came to get me. And I said, I think it was me, Carl. And we got them back and pulled them back as close as we could to the battalion.
So how many men did you have in your battalion left? I mean, how many people did you lose?
Oh, I don't know. Total casualty. Our company, I think, started out with about 300 men, and I think there was only 45 or 50 left that hadn't either been wounded on the attack and taken back. I don't remember how many were captured at that time. I really don't. But
So-
there are lots of other things.
So how did that make you feel, being the only one just kind of trapped, did you feel betrayed, or what were things going?
As an individual, I don't think they did. The other men did, because they hadn't known what was going on with the battalion commander asking permission to leave. So they didn't have it. I was kind of a duty-bound person. I mean, I kind of respected officers, and if they said do this, well, I kind of said this is what we'll do. But I recall this other man who was running with me, and we both wondered just why, when we saw it was so hopeless, why they wouldn't say pull back and we'll try again some other time, you know. The old adage that he who runs away will live to fight another day, and but they didn't do that. But like I say, maybe that was the turning point. Who knows? Maybe it worked out.
So what happened in the morning, the next morning?
After we were captured.
Yeah. You were actually captured.
Yeah. It was. We were in this little kind of a fruit cellar or Ritz cellar type of thing off a shed, and that was the battalion commander's hole, and we were in there, and we were just completely surrounded. We were going to try to get out with some others, and they just moved the tank in and right up to the door, and so went out, and that's when he destroyed the radio. It was after that last statement, we won't be here, so he destroyed the radio. So then they took us, after we were captured, they took part of us across the Rhine River into Germany, and we walked past a very scenic spot called Baden-Baden, which today is a resort area. And they took us, I don't recall where, but to some schoolhouse, I remember, for interrogation.
How many of you did they take?
In that particular marching group, I think there were about 30 of us, 30, 35. But there were more than that joined us from someplace else. But, and they interrogated us, and they didn't need to interrogate us. They knew everything we knew.
So they treated you pretty well, or how did they treat you?
They were not brutal, no. You mean in prison camp?
Yeah, and like throughout.
Well, from there we went to Stuttgart on a train, and were there for some time, and then we went to northern Germany near Bremen, a place called Fallenbassel. That was probably the worst, absolute worst part of war, being locked in a boxcar for 3 days and 3 nights. And particularly when the train stopped in a railroad yard when an air raid was on, and the guards all ran for underground, and we tried to break the doors down on the car, but couldn't break out. Luckily, they found someplace else to bomb. I mean, but we kind of felt that was it, that they would bomb that railroad yard. And but then, as far as being treated, there was nothing to eat. I mean, a lot of the men suffered terribly. I was very small, so I didn't suffer. The big men suffered from lack of food. Small men didn't as much. But there was no brutality of mine. The places we lived were horrible and lice-ridden and cold. We didn't fare nearly as badly as we were in a not a compound, but a whole camp that had a lot of Russians who had been there for years, Indians. I'm from India. Some French, some Poles. They were really, really treated badly. They were dying like flies. But, and they used to get upset with us if we got too near the fence, and they'd say, "Move back, or we'll shoot you." And one time, to prove it, they just shot a Russian who happened to be standing nearby, which made us change our mind, as you can imagine. But it was grim.
Is this your commanding officer still with you at these?
No, they put the officers in different camps, so we never saw them. I never saw my commanding officer from 45 to 60. Well, no, 85. Okay. 85. At a reunion, first time I'd seen him. And that was kind of interesting. Did you meet him again?
When you guys are captured, do you know at all what's going on around you? Like, do you know news? How much news reaches to you about like the war and what's going on?
None. The only clue you had was when the final bombing started over Germany. When you saw that many planes going toward Berlin, unopposed, you knew it couldn't be long. And then they did drop leaflets into those camps saying that they were not far and to not move, don't try to get out of them. You'll just get in the way. And so that was that was a help knowing that they were that close to liberation.
What do you remember going through your head when you got did you get a leaflet yourself, or?
Yeah, they were all over. Well, that was a very great time for rejoicing. And then they began to. The other thing that we noticed that they had pulled some of the German guards away. There was a German barracks of some sort near there, and we noticed that they had disappeared. So we knew that something was up when they did. But we did as we were told, stay put, because you'll be in the way. And it was the British that liberated us, British Eighth Army. And strangely enough, I didn't know until 3 years ago that the British GI who stood on the tank and told us he was glad to see us and that they'd get us out in a few days and what they'd like us to do and not to do. I didn't realize until about 3 or 4 years ago that was General Montgomery. Wow. I thought it was just a British GI. I didn't know what Montgomery looked like, but some of the men who knew and read some things, that was he.
So what do you remember anything else about him? Yeah.
No, of course, Montgomery was a swaggerer too, and he didn't look like he'd been through a war. He looked like he just came out of a movie someplace, and that's pretty much. He didn't stay long.
How long were you guys captured?
We were only in about from January till April, which was long enough. 4 months, 3 months, 4 months, something like that. But the day the liberation was fine. Then we all kind of went crazy.
Do you remember what day that was?
April 17th.
April 17th.
Yeah. What day of the week, I don't know. But the men dispersed, and they went outside the camp, and they raided that barracks, and they found oatmeal and other food. And strangely enough, a lot of them were hurt much worse in the first day or two after they were liberated than they were, because they ate and ate and ate. Ate too much, yeah. I remember one thing very fondly. We'd been watching a goose. It stayed right around the fence where we were. Some of the guys caught that goose. They caught it, killed it, cleaned it, and cooked it, and ate it in about 40 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And then became very ill. This was just too much for their stomachs.
So, are you just watching it this time still, or are you just kind of eating too?
Oh, I was eating too, but not like they did.
Yeah.
I didn't imagine as much, but then we waited for it to go back to England. They flew us to England. Some of us they took to England, put us in the hospital at Oxford, and we spent time there.
How was it there waiting for the war to be over?
Wonderful, because we were there when May 8th came. And a lot of bells, a lot of horns. I recall just going off by myself and sitting on a wall. I recall this city. Yeah. It didn't seem, among the troops, there was no big celebration. It was just kind of a quiet relief type of thing, But, among the British people, I don't know, because I wasn't in a city. I don't know how they reacted. But among the American soldiers in the hospital with us, there was no great joyous uprising.
What was the first thing you wanted to do when the war is over? Like right then when you're sitting there thinking, what do you...
I think that was probably one of the few times I'd ever experienced homesickness. There's too much going on before. And now, what can happen now, Yeah. I think that was probably my first experience with real homesickness when I was in service. And I think maybe there were other men who've experienced the same thing but wouldn't admit it. No. But that was kind of an interesting time, too. Took very good care of us in the hospital, put us on restricted diets for, I think, about 7 days. Now, the joyous uprising was the first day the captain came in and said, "You may go on the chow line today." I remember sitting on the bed for an hour and a half. Everybody sat on the edge of the bed waiting for the whistle to blow. And then that was the first time they'd eaten really well. And safely.
Do you remember what you ate?
That day? I do. I certainly do. I remember a lot of strange things that other people don't remember. during the Depression, you talked about Depression, butcher shops gave liver away. I mean, they gave it away for cat food. And we had a lot of liver in our house because we didn't have enough money to buy anything else. But I couldn't eat it. I'd get sick just at the smell of it. I'd have to leave the house, and I wouldn't eat it. So what was on that very first lunch?
Oh, no.
I'm telling you, we ran there, and I looked in that and I said, this is real irony. How could this be? If there was a God, why did they put liver in that pan? But you know what? I ate it. And I've eaten it ever since. So, no, strange things I remember.
What are other things?
When I first met Captain Helton after the war, I said, you know, Carl, I said, I remember the password and the countersign the night we were captured. He said, no, you couldn't remember that, could you? I said, I do. And he said, well, you're probably the only man alive that remembers it, and I remember it to this day. And I said, the only reason I think I remembered it is when we were pulling the outpost back in Hurlesheim, and we gave them, there was one place we went, and we thought we had some men in this one basement. So down and rapped on the door, and they said, give us the password. And I forgot it. Absolutely, just blank, just went blank. And the next voice I heard on the other side of the door is, should we let him in or should we shoot him? You know what happened? It came back. It was indelible for all time, in eternity. And I've never forgotten it ever since. And I know I've had some fun at some reunions about people who were at Hurlesheim, you know. So, yeah, I said it certainly was. No question about what it was. I know it. Password was Fisk, and the countersign was debris. And the reason they chose passwords and countersigns like that, because those two words have been very difficult for a German to say, unless they had been trained in America. So those are little things. The big things I tend to forget. The little things I tend to remember. You know.
What was your first encounter with your family, and did you write them as soon as you came out from
Yeah.
the camps?
Yeah, that's right. They allowed us to ride immediately. Yeah, and that would have been the first encounter. The second encounter was when after came back from England, and I was taken to Fort Leavenworth, and then I hitchhiked home to Atchison, and my mother was waiting on the front porch for me. I told her, I called her the night before, and I said, they're going to let us out sometime tomorrow afternoon. So she was sitting on the front porch when I walked up to the house. That was the first encounter. Then my father came home from work later. And again, it was kind of quiet. We were not terribly emotional people. I mean, we had emotions, but we didn't express them a lot, usually. I think that was it.
How about your brother? Had he come home before you?
No, he came after. He came after. A little while. And but that was a nice home gathering. I hadn't seen him for years. And that was pretty much it, what happened to us. Of course, what's happened since with the association has been the great part.
So, how did you join the association right after the war?
No, boy, there's so many strange stories I haven't even forgotten. I knew nothing about the association. And in 1984, I went back to Europe with a group of high school students with the choir. We were sponsoring the choirs as chaperones, and we went to Strasbourg, and we had a day off. So we rented a car and went to Hurlesheim. And my wife asked me, are you sure you want to go back? And I said, yeah, I do. And so we went back, and I wanted to see if I could find the place where we'd been captured. So we went into the town, but before we went in, I told her if we could find it, how I visualized it, how it was, as I recall. Because there probably hadn't been a day, even when I was teaching or standing on a podium and directing the choir, that sometime during that rehearsal, my mind wouldn't go back, you know. So I began to wonder if my memory was playing tricks, and that really worried me, so I was glad to go back. And so I told her what it would look like, and so we walked around the town a little bit, and I said, I think I know where it was from the center of town. And so we went one way, and I said, no. And we didn't find anything I had described to her, because I wanted her to say, is this it? I didn't want to go and say, this is it, you know, and it wasn't. I wanted her to be able to, by my description. And so I said, well, I'll go try once again. I said, is there any place you see down any street, a window that you can see in a window down the street that kind of sticks out? And she looked and says, yeah, there's one right down there. So I said, well, let's go there. Because I recall this window, because we had an outpost in there that you could see. And so we were walking along, and finally she said, was this it? And it was, just to the T, except there was a tree in the courtyard that wasn't there. The rest of it was all there, just as I described it. And so after that, then I got interested. So I came back and wrote the Bureau of Military History, see anything about the division. They said, well, yeah, you have an association. And the president lives in Seward, Nebraska. And I said, well, that's kind of strange, because I'm going to going through Seward in 4 days.
Wow.
That was my first time, and we've been with it ever since. It's been interesting, and it's caused some other things, like this man I told you, this man from Alton or Ovis that I told you about was my best friend that I thought was killed. All I knew about him was that he lived in California, and he had a strange name, Alton or Ovis. And as a matter of fact, it was at that time that I was trying to get a book about the 12th from the Interlibrary Loan, and all the telephone books from Los Angeles were right beside where I was sitting. I don't know, Los Angeles has, what, four or five telephone books, so I pulled one out, and sure enough, there was an A.R. Ovis, the first one I pulled out. This sounds like another made-up story, but it's true. So I got all excited, and I ran home and went to the phone and dialed about half the number and hung it up. And it took me 2 weeks to get up courage enough. You know, I thought, well, he might be in ill or bad straits, or it might not be him. Maybe just leave memories lie where they are. About 2 weeks later, I was home alone, and I got up nerve enough one Saturday night, and I went to it. And the phone answered, and says, yes, and I says, Alton? Because I thought I recognized his voice, because he had a particular strange voice. And he said, yes. And I said, were you ever known as Squeaky? And there's this long pause on the other end. And he says, boy, this is somebody I haven't seen for a long time. We talked for about 45 minutes. That was he, the first phone call, and recognized his voice. Well, we met a year later at the reunion in California. Had a wonderful time. But a strange thing, you know, sometimes maybe the memory should have lied, because I've wondered. He died 10 months after that, or something like that. But his wife told my wife that after he put down that phone, he became ill. I mean, physically, he was ill. The shock just did something to his body, that just hearing a voice come over the phone like that. Well, he was more shocked than I was, because I was doing the calling. But we've had a lot of experiences like this, finding people that you didn't know.
So is it Herlesham that has impacted you most, do you think?
Probably.
That one night?
Yeah. I think it's made you appreciate life. I really do. Because I was completely resigned to die. I mean, when they were putting grenades right in that courtyard where we were, and they moved that tank up, it was kind of strange, too. I hope when my time comes I can be as calm as I was then. Because it was just a resignation. That's here it is, you know. But, so I think it's made me appreciate a lot of things more than I ever did. And we do think about it a lot. I mean, you don't ever quit thinking about it. I think the thing you think about is, why did it go that way, and what could you have done personally to change it? And I suppose that's good. In some ways it's bad, because you can't really tell. For instance, some of the men that were in that, and we said we'll go 2 at a time out to this barn and try to get across up to where that ammunition truck is. And so we had paired off, and we were going 2 at a time. And about the time, as our time to come, was when all the grenades started coming in. There was no way we could have reached that door. And then you think, well, should have gone anyhow. But who's to say? You can't say what you should have done. But I think probably that was what I worried about all those years more than anything. Should I have gone? Maybe I could have done something. Maybe I failed those other guys in doing. But it was strange after we left Herlisheim with my wife. She said, well, she was glad she was there, but she said, "Are you glad you came?" And I said, "Yes, because this is the first time in 40 years I've been at peace." Now, I don't know if she understood that or not, but I tell that to other men and they understand. But sometimes you have to go back where something was bad. Now we have a psychological term called closure, I guess, but we didn't know what it was then. So, but the 12th was, since then, has been very good to me. The association of men. And it's a strange thing with the reunions and everything. You may have noticed where you were around these men. They would talk about things, but they generally remembered the funny things that happened. And there's a lot of laughter in these guys, and that's fun. So,
Are there any more major stories that I missed?
oh, I don't think so. And other than that, I kind of glossed over the fear in that train ride. It did come home to me this last year when we were in Washington. We went to the Holocaust Museum, which is a frightening thing. Just, did you?
I
Have you
didn't
ever
have
been?
a chance to go. I'm going to go to the...
No, it's frightening, and it's very strange how quiet it is. Nobody talks, even to people around you. The one thing that almost stopped me was the walk that you had to go through a boxcar to get to the other side. That I hesitated. And that surprised me. I didn't think it would, but that I just almost didn't want to go back through that thing. You know. Other major things? No. I don't think so.
Did people talk about the concentration camps at all? Did you guys know that they existed? You know, when you guys were back there, you know, fighting...
Did we know they existed?
Yeah.
No, we didn't. It was just something, you know. And I suppose that's why it was so hard for other people to believe. And strangely enough, I believe that a lot of the Germans didn't know they existed. And that's frightening to me. That is frightening. That's frightening because I wonder, as a country, how much you really ever know. Because I don't believe they did. No, we didn't know. We had just heard about them. A lot of them we thought, if we did hear about them, we thought were propaganda films, you know, to rile us up. But they weren't. And there was really, I don't believe it could happen again because of communications being so fast. When we think of only 50 years ago, communications were really pretty primitive. Sometimes you got a broadcast from Europe and sometimes you didn't, depending on the sunspots, you know, kind of a thing. But I don't think we really realized. Now, some of our people who went on in the Lansdorf, they realized it. You know. I had a person not too long ago, a year or so, said, "I just don't believe those things ever happened." I said, "Well, I've got some personal friends if you'd like me to contact them, they can tell you." Because they were there and they saw it. But, but man's inhumanity to man. I hope we've grown some. I don't know if we have or not. But,
I think so. Did you guys have any other?
Very thorough.
Thank you.
you're welcome.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's it.
Good. It's been a pleasure.